I started it.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Barbara and Nancy and everybody for coming out. I am not as professional looking as I typically like to be. I've been quite under the weather. Just now starting to feel a little bit better. And always prefer to see folks in person, but I'm really relieved tonight that it's virtual because I don't think I would have made it otherwise. Yeah, I got my tea here. I might start coughing. If I do, just bear with me. I'll try to mute myself, take a quick drink and come on back. Chaya Rubenstein has shared that there's an important piece on an Illinois assault weapons ban in the Sun-Times. If you're able to put that link to that article in the chat, I'd appreciate that, Chaya. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. And keep in mind, put a pin in the Illinois assault weapons ban, because at the end of my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. There's some really good news to share. So, yes, everything Barb said is true. Barbara, I'm sorry, everything Barbara said is true. My two current roles are, as she said, I'm the chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. We are the one of only 3 offices of violence prevention in the country that are located in prosecutors' offices. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about why that's important and why it's groundbreaking for the issue of gun violence prevention. In fact, there's the state's attorney right now, and he does not know that I'm talking to you right now. So I will follow up with him after. So where was I? Yes, so that's my current role. I was elected on November 8th to serve as Lake County Commissioner for District 18, which includes Hawthorne Woods, Lake Zurich, Long Grove, Killdeer, Buffalo Grove, and Vernon Hills. So if you know any folks who live in that area, there's a pretty good chance I am, as of Monday, their Lake County board member, which I'm so very excited about. That's my other major role. Those are, I guess, what I would call my 2 professional roles. Although I have, as Barbara said, for the last 7 years, been a full-time advocate for gun violence prevention. Although I have 2 new jobs now, I do not intend to stop that advocacy. Be careful that I do it properly as an elected official, which means I will do it in a very nonpartisan way. But I will continue to do everything I can to help anybody who's interested in getting involved in the gun violence prevention movement to do that. So as Barbara described, I have had an advocacy job at the state level. I've had an advocacy job at the federal level. And during the last 5 years, I've been advocating at the local level, not in any professional role, but just as a citizen of Lake County, a resident of Lake County, for the first ever Office of Gun Violence Prevention here. And I will circle back to that in a few minutes, but the takeaway is been very active at the local, state, and federal levels for many years now, which means anything that you want to know about how to get involved in the gun violence prevention movement, if I don't have the answer, I know how to get you the answer. Same goes for any questions you might have about, why do we have this horrendous problem in the United States? I either know the answer or I know the person who does. So I really hope that whatever questions, you have in mind tonight, that you will ask them. And my contact information is in the presentation. Every single person is free to reach out to me at my email or phone number. They're both in the presentation. If there's anything I can do to help you get engaged. You are also welcome to freely share my contact information with anyone you know who is fed up and really wants to do something about the gun violence epidemic. So if you will look in the chat for a moment, you'll see the very first item in the chat is a message from me. If you click on that link, you can follow along with this presentation in your browser, although I am going to share it in the Zoom here for a minute. Or you could just copy and paste that link, save it for later, and you will be able to access that link and look through the presentation at your own pace. And that's important because there are lots of working links in this document that will really help you learn more and also connect with some people and organizations who are Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have to take a breath. It will help you connect with any people and organizations who are engaged in the movement now. Now let me bear with me a moment while I just figure out, I want to make sure everybody has access to that in case you want to log in right now.
Sarah, pardon me, they said I need an authentication code.
Yes, I'm fixing that right now, actually.
Okay.
You just hold up 1 second. Okay, so the access is now updated. So anybody with that link should be able to open the document. Again,
It worked.
Link, either follow along right now or save the link and go back and look at it later. I am going to go ahead and share this presentation in the screen right now. And nope, that's not it. Hold on.
It's working for me, Sarah.
Okay, great. Here we go. Now, move things around. Okay, you should be able now. Okay, hold on. I don't know why it's not letting me. I got it. Okay. So I can see Nancy's face right now. Could you give me a thumbs up if you can see Honor with Action Illinois? Okay, great. All right. This is not my actual presentation for tonight. What I'm starting with is, I said a few moments ago, in addition to my 2 professional roles, running the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative and being a Lake County board member, I'm continuing with my advocacy work, although simply on the education side, right? You won't see me really lobbying in Washington. I've got too many things to do here in Illinois. But I am determined to continue to help spread the word and educate people and to continue learning myself about this movement. And the way that I do that is I run an organization called Honor with Action Illinois. It's a closed group. I don't really publicize it much because many of the people who join me every 2 weeks for our Honor with Action biweekly updates are survivors of gun violence. And I try very hard to protect them and not let anyone in who might be interested in trolling us. Not everyone, whoever who joins, is a survivor of gun violence. Many people are like me, not survivors, but just people who really feel like it's up to all of us in order to take steps in order to end this plague in our country. So just so everybody knows, we meet every other Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. Central Time. You can click on the link here in this presentation slide in order to register. Once you register, there is no, you never have to register again. You will automatically be invited to every meeting until you ask to be removed from the mailing list. Our next meeting, we met last Friday, so we will meet again on December 9th. If you want to go ahead and register, like I said, you'll automatically get a reminder. And I absolutely do not expect everyone to join every week. I just encourage people to join whenever they can. So pretty quickly, I'm just going to fly through the slides from last week's biweekly updates so you can get an idea of what we're about. And then once I've kind of shown you what Honor with Action is about and how you can stay educated and engaged on our movement by joining us every other Friday, then I've got an actual presentation just for League of Women Voters of Highland Park that I'll get to. So like I said, we meet every other Friday. Our next meeting is December 9, but you can register anytime and you will get a reminder about the meeting and information about how to join. All of our meetings are, of course, virtual. So at the beginning of every biweekly update, I give an agenda. I'll give you an example. On this past Friday, we always have a guest speaker. This past Friday, our guest speaker was Matthew Littman, who is the executive director of 97%. 97% is an organization that works to engage gun owners in the effort to reduce gun violence. And they just released a really incredible report about how gun owners feel about the need for gun safety legislation. Spoiler alert, they are overwhelmingly in favor of it, no matter what the gun lobby may tell you. I also do a quick warning for survivors. Each time we meet, we honor victims from a recent shooting. We did Club Q last week. I also give updates on important events or dates that are coming up. You may or may not know that December 14th is the 10th anniversary of the tragedy at Sandy Hook. So here, like, I tell people how they can host a vigil in their community to honor all victims of gun violence. I have information for survivors, how they can support Highland Park survivors in particular, but also how you can get support for survivors anywhere. I also include information about how you can contribute to support people involved in other mass shootings and other types of gun violence. And this is the key slide I wanted to show you. The mission for the Honor with Action Illinois network is we are gun violence prevention advocates who recognize that the gun violence epidemic is a reflection of racial and socioeconomic inequities everywhere, especially in the criminal justice system. So that's really what we're all about. And I encourage, when you have some time, for you to go look at this slide, click on this link. You will hear from July 4th survivor and Highland Park resident Jordan Kane. She's being interviewed on July 5th about her experience at the parade. And in that interview, she really articulates well our entire mission with the Honor with Action Illinois network. I also talk every week about how people can get involved at both the federal and state level. This is just information about me if you'd like to know more about my qualifications. We then always have a federal legislative update. This is what we talked about this week. This past week, we talked about what the results of the 2022 general election in Washington mean for our movement. I also shared this article, The Trace. If you've not heard of The Trace, it's an outstanding media organization that focuses only on the gun violence issue. And they did an incredible article on young history-making candidates who ran on gun violence prevention and won. And Nabila Syed, who was just elected the first Muslim American, I believe she is 24 years old, and she just defeated a Republican in the 51st district, which is one of the redder areas of Lake County. She will now represent the southwestern part of Lake County in Springfield, which is pretty amazing. I also then, this gives you an example of what I go through. I tell people how we can use the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which Biden signed into law this summer. First firearm violence bill at the federal level in 30 years to be signed into law. And you can use that in order to get the right candidates elected to Congress, the ones who will vote in favor of gun safety legislation. Other ways people can get involved at the federal level. And then here is where I shared information and introduced our guest speaker, Matthew Littman. Then we move on in every biweekly update, and I share information about what's happening at the state level. If anybody's wondering, these are the types of bills that we hope will move in the 103rd General Assembly in Springfield. But again, put a pin in this. There was a big development today that I'm going to tell you about. A few of these initiatives have now been announced as part of a new package of gun safety legislation, which I'll talk about more in a minute. I also have another call to action at the state level here. These are all of the members of the Firearm Safety and Reform Working Group in the House. And so I asked all of the people in my Honor with Action meeting to contact these folks and ask them for an assault weapons ban. Also, I always give people a way to take action. That's what this is about. And I also include, and have for the last several months, some really important information on the Safety Act and the end of cash bail. As you're all probably aware, during the most recent election, Republicans really used a lot of false information, misinformation about the Safety Act as a political weapon. And so we tried really hard to push back and spread the truth about the Safety Act. There's a lot of information here if you'd like to dig in deep and find out what's true about the Safety Act, not what you heard in Republican political campaign commercials over the last few months. The reason at first glance, this may seem like it doesn't have anything to do with gun violence prevention, but actually it does, because the inequities in the criminal justice system, which the Safety Act is intended to address and reform, that is the criminal justice system in Illinois, that those inequities are a primary root cause of our gun violence epidemic. And I'm going to make that connection for you with the slide here in a few minutes. Moving on, during every biweekly update, we have a local report. So anybody can share what's going on in their own local communities and have calls to action at the local level. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to a new 501c3. So that is the kind of nonprofit organization that advocates and educates, but never on behalf of a candidate, right? So a C3 will only advocate for policy change and work to educate the public about an issue. So there is a new C3 for gun violence prevention in Illinois. It's called the Illinois Alliance to Prevent Gun Violence. And it is growing like mad. It started in July and has added over 30 organizations. They've already met with the Senate President, Don Harmon, and they've lined up several other meetings with other legislators already, and are able to always bring constituents with them. So that's pretty amazing for such a new organization. I encourage everyone to check it out and join. Please join us on Twitter and Facebook as individuals, of course, not as League of Women Voters, but if you want to join as League of Women Voters, that'd be great too. We are a C3, not a C4, so I'm not sure whether or not that's possible, but we'd love to have you. This is another local way people can get involved. I also give lots of updates every time we meet on things that are happening, just in case anyone here is interested. Every week, there's the National Gun Violence Table Call, which is run by Bob Creamer, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky's husband. And that is gun violence activists, professional and non-professional, from all over the country. And we convene every Wednesday to share information and calls to action. So if you're interested in joining that, please reach out to me and I'll get you added to the mailing list. And next Wednesday, you can join virtually if you wish for the 8th Annual National Gun Violence Prevention Conference. You can register right here. It's next week, December 6th and 7th. It is happening in person, but in-person registration is closed, so you can still join virtually. Moving on, here's a job announcement that I shared within the gun violence prevention movement, and then I always share articles, information, things, research, things that might be of interest to people who join, and then we have a Q&A, and I encourage people to reach out to me. So I wanted to share all that with you. I wanted to run through that presentation with you so you get an idea of what our biweekly updates are about. Anyone is free to join. I will vet you and make sure that you're not an NRA member. But I have a feeling anybody in this group probably isn't. So I'm sure it would be no problem to invite you to join us. Again, do not need to come every week. You don't even need to stay the whole hour. It's just a way to stay engaged and learn. I mean, this issue is so complex that I'm still learning, and I've been doing it almost full time for 7 years. So it's just a way for us all to come together, learn more, have a sense of what's going on, have our pulse on the movement, both locally at the state level and nationally. So are there any questions about the Honor with Action Network or anything that I raised before I go on to my sort of official presentation for y'all? Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just answer at this point. I've got a few slides left. I'm going to get away from flipping through slides. I'd really like to just sort of answer some questions that I had discussed with Nancy and Barbara in the lead up to tonight's conversation. These are some questions that the three of us came up with that we thought you might be interested in hearing about. So this is where I'm going to focus my remarks, but if somebody's got a question and that takes the conversation in a different direction, that's fine with me too. But I'll just dive right in. So Barbara and Nancy said that they thought it might be of interest to everyone listening to understand how I got involved in the gun violence prevention movement. So I am not a survivor of gun violence. I'm not sure if Nancy and Barbara meant this, but most often people ask me how I got involved, and I can tell they assume that I have been a victim of gun violence or a survivor. That is not true. I am not a survivor. 7 years ago, my little sister came to me and she was crying, and she had just had a baby. She had a 4-year-old and an infant, and she is the full-time breadwinner for her family. And she was crying and she said, "Why doesn't anyone care? Why doesn't anyone do anything?" And she was talking about the tragedy at Sandy Hook. She said, they were children, they were babies. And I turned to her and I didn't really give it much thought. It just sort of popped out of my mouth. I said, because people like you and me choose to spend our free time at the gym instead of getting involved. Now, I know that's not true for a lot of you folks listening. I mean, I know that the League of Women Voters of Highland Park was founded in 1928. So, I mean, I know that all of you are people who've been really engaged in your communities and trying to make it a better place, probably all of your lives. But for a lot of Americans, myself included, until about 7 years ago, I just wasn't engaged. You know, I read the newspapers and I voted in general elections, and I thought that I was a fully engaged citizen. None of that was true. And watching my little sister cry really motivated me. I felt just as strongly about how terrible it feels to drop your kids off at school and wonder if today is the day that their school is going to get shot up. And I thought to myself, my sister doesn't have the time to get involved. My kids are older. I do. I think I'm going to go to this Moms Demand Action meeting. So in short order, after a couple of weeks, I started the first Moms Demand Action group in the northern suburbs. And that was in the fall of 2015. During that first year, I was really happy if I got 7 or 8 people at a meeting. A year later, Donald Trump was elected. 2 months after that, he was inaugurated. The next day, we had the first Women's March. And at my next Moms Demand Action meeting after the first Women's March, I had 45 people at my meeting. It was just this huge outpouring of energy that came out of the first Women's March, and people were directing it at their anger and frustration with gun violence, and they wanted something to do. So, and this part is key. This is a sort of a pivot point in my origin story, but it's a really important one. At the time, I had already begun getting my small group of Moms Demand Action members behind a bill in Springfield called the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. And the Gun Dealer Licensing Act at the time in 2016 had been stalled in Springfield in the General Assembly for 14 years in a row. It had failed to advance in either the House or the Senate because it was seen as a bill that would only help people in gang-ridden communities. I'm putting those in quotes because most of the gun violence that happens in our underserved communities is actually not related to gang activity, but that's how people often perceive it. But because it was seen as a bill that would reduce the illegal trafficking of firearms, which mostly impacts communities that are underserved or gang-ridden, no one outside of Chicago wanted to see this bill passed. That all changed when moms got involved. And so in 2016, I had already been advocating and having my Moms Demand Action volunteers advocate on behalf of this bill. And suddenly I had dozens and dozens of people who were begging me for something to do. So I directed them and said, okay, these are your legislators in the Senate. They're going to vote on the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. Call them, tell them you want them to vote yes, call all your friends in other parts of the state, tell them to call their senators and ask them to vote yes. And 2 months after Trump was inaugurated, it finally passed after 14 years out of the Illinois Senate. And it passed by 1 vote. And so the only thing that had changed was people at the grassroots had gotten involved. And it shouldn't matter that most of us here at the grassroots were from communities of privilege, but it did. We got legislators throughout the state outside of Cook County to care about this bill. And that's why it passed. Shortly after that, I began spending time in some of these underserved communities on the south and west side of Chicago. And that was so very important that I connected with the folks on the south and west side of Chicago who were just beginning to approach ending everyday gun violence in underserved communities in a new way. And they took the time to teach me about how gun violence that happens in my community, whether it's school shootings or shootings at a parade, how that is intimately and directly connected to the gun violence that happens every day in our underserved communities. And understanding that and being inspired by the violence prevention work that these people on the south and west side of Chicago were doing made me determined to get that type of work in Lake County. And that is also, it's not only my origin story, it's also the origin story of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative here in Lake County. So the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative is an idea that I took to the former state's attorney, Mike Neerheim, about 6 years ago. And I told him what was happening on the west side of Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, and I invited him to go with me to visit the violence interrupters that are at work in those communities. These are people who are typically formerly gang affiliated, formerly incarcerated, and they are the only people who have credibility on the streets of our underserved communities in order to get young people, mostly who are at risk of committing violence or being a victim of violence, to find more peaceful ways to solve their conflicts. I was so inspired by what they were doing and so struck by the fact that the work that was being done in Austin on the far west side of Chicago was benefiting, making Oak Park safer. And the people of Oak Park, for the most part, didn't even know these violence interrupters were doing this amazing work just 1 mile away. And by the way, these violence interrupters work unarmed, they have no weapons, and they have no bulletproof vests. They put their lives on the line every day in order to reduce gun violence in their communities. And I'll give you just one example about why this model is so effective. One of the best organizations in the Austin is located in the Austin community. It's called the Institute for Nonviolent Chicago. Between 2016 and the beginning of the pandemic, they've reduced gun violence in the Austin community by 50%. Of course, COVID came and complicated a lot. The picture changed dramatically after COVID, but we know for sure that this violence interrupter model works. And in my national work with Newtown Action Alliance, one of the many things I was involved in was helping to get federal funding for the first time ever for violence interruption work. And that is how, after Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhart was elected, he and I began immediately planning for the GVPI to bring violence interruption to Lake County. He took office 2 years ago. 2 years ago, he and I sat down for our first meeting to talk about how to design the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative, what form it should take, and how to find the funding for it. Fast forward a year, about 1 year ago, we approached the Lake County Board and asked for American Rescue Plan funds, so that federal funding in order to start a violence interruption program here in Lake County. It took us another few months to get that passed and approved out of the Lake County Board, and we were approved in March. And on June 3rd, we launched the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office. As I said, the first ever Office of Violence Prevention in Illinois in a prosecutor's office. And I'm going to kind of show you a quick slide so you can kind of picture what our Gun Violence Prevention Initiative is about. But I just want to point out, we launched that Gun Violence Prevention Initiative on June 3rd, 1 month and 1 day before the shooting in Highland Park. And just as an aside, what I'm about to say is nothing in comparison to the people who were there that day. I'm sure many of you were. what I'm about to say is nothing in comparison to the pain and suffering that so many people who were there that day and directly impacted are experiencing. But I can tell you in my 7 years, I've never had a lower moment than July 4th, when it dawned on me that it took me 5 years to get an Office of Violence Prevention in Lake County. And I truly believed in a pretty childish way that if I could have gotten that done faster, then this never would have happened in my community, in my county. I recognize that's a childish way to look at it. But the pain of realizing, I'd worked so hard and so long, and then we finally launched one day before the very thing that I had feared most actually came to pass. So I'm not a survivor of the July 4th shooting, but I'm still impacted, right? And I think that's a very crucial thing to always remember. Nobody is unaffected by gun violence in this country. Doesn't matter who you are. So now I'll just jump ahead for a minute and show you what the GVPI this is a work in progress and we're still evolving, but I'll kind of give you an idea of what it's about. So the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative, it consists of a steering committee. We will soon hire a director for the GVPI, and we work together with community-based organizations, including the Juvenile Justice Council. And we are working together in order to, do our very first priority, which is find a community-based organization in the Waukegan, Zion, North Chicago area in order to be the home of our violence interruption program. So that's going to be what you see here in the orange section. The violence interruption program will include street and community presence in the form of our violence interrupters. These are people who are usually formerly gang affiliated, formerly incarcerated. And like I said, they know the people on the streets in Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion who are most likely to be engaged in violence. And so our violence interruption program will be training them to engage those at-risk individuals in things like peacemaking techniques for de-escalating conflict. But, they do it in a way that, if I were to go in and do that with the folks that are in risk and at risk in our underserved communities, like they would laugh at me and, turn their backs on me because I'm a white woman. I mean, I can't possibly understand what it's like to be a young person of color growing up with very limited resources in a place like Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion. But our violence interrupters do know. And so what the model does is it teaches them, it trains these violence interrupters to teach these in risk and at risk people how to find peaceful ways to solve their conflicts. But they do that, they're going to be doing that in coordination with many, many, many community-based organizations from all over Lake County. For example, A Safe Place, Mano y Mano, NERCO, I'm forgetting what that stands for right now, Coalition to Reduce Recidivism. I could go on and on and on. So there'll be this partnership so that our community-based organizations can provide wraparound services once some of these young folks have gotten out of the immediate dangerous situation that they're in. And this is really the key part. If you move down here to the restorative justice piece, restorative justice, and this is what we're doing differently in our Office of Violence Prevention than what other offices of violence prevention are doing around the country. What Eric Reinhardt, the state's attorney, is doing is currently expanding his deflection and diversion programs for nonviolent offenses only, and bringing a restorative justice lens and approach to all of that work. So expanding opportunities for nonviolent offenders to have access to ways to avoid arrest and incarceration. And when you look at the arrows over here, these represent the different entities or networks or communities with a small c from around the county that we're using in order to locate these at-risk folks. So back to the interruption piece, which is our top priority, because this is really sort of the most urgent area of concern, because people are dying every day in Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion. And so a few weeks ago, we announced that the Waukegan Township and Coalition to Reduce Recidivism will be the home of our violence interruption program. And we are right now interviewing violence interrupters and a program manager. We expect to have the announcement for a program manager ready to go before the end of the year. In January, we'll be holding our first public education and community awareness event to introduce the program manager and hopefully some more violence interrupters that are ready to join the staff. And we're really going to start looking for partners all over Lake County who can help us spread the word about what we're doing. So that's what the a general overview of the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. And now I'm going to go on to the next slide, or I'm going to go pop back. I'm going to move on to how July 4th has impacted our work at the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative. But before I'll go back to the slide and see if anybody has any questions about the GVPI or anything that, comes to mind that they'd like to share. Comments are welcome too, as well as questions.
Sara, there are things in chat.
Oh, there are. Okay.
There are questions in chat. Can you get to them?
I don't know why, but I can't see the chat. Ah, there it is.
Okay.
I'm going to have to stop sharing for me to see the chat. I don't know why that is, but okay. I don't see a question.
I don't see any
There's no
questions.
question.
Yeah, huh. It showed up as, no, I can't get out of your chat.
Yeah, no, what I'm seeing are the links to articles.
I
Yeah,
don't know.
that's all I see.
Sharon, did you have a question? Sharon Nerod or Linda?
No, since you asked, I didn't put anything in the chat.
Okay.
But I will ask the question that was on my mind anyway.
Great.
I'm familiar with the violence preventers up in Waukegan, and I'm a member of the Juvenile Justice Council.
Oh,
So,
wonderful. You know Trey Baker?
oh yes.
Yeah. So
He's-
Trey is on our GVPI team.
So, all of the mass shootings, and this has been pointed out by people other than me, are not people from underserved communities. They're not people of color. And a lot of talk around July 4th was how come nobody saw this coming? How come there wasn't, if you want to use the expression, violence intervention people to stop that? How do you expand your organizational chart
Excuse me.
for things outside that realm?
Yeah, when I first put this slide up on the screen, I said this is a work in progress and it will evolve, and that's absolutely true. What we envision over the next few years is this entire is adding more. I don't know what to call this shape. What is this? An octagon? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, a sexagon. I don't know what this shape is, but we'll be adding more over the next few years. We have to start with the violence interruption piece because our first bulk chunk of funding came from the American Rescue Plan Act. And so it has to be used to create community violence interruption programs. But we have since, so that was an original $500,000 that we got to start the interruption program. We have since raised another $1.5 million that we are going to be putting towards building out these other programs, but also adding more to this gun violence prevention ecosystem in Lake County.
Mm-hmm.
And so one key piece is through the Juvenile Justice Council and the Office of the Regional Superintendent of Schools, Michael Karner. So
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of envisioning one, maybe two other sexagons that are really focused on bringing or integrating the the folks that have connections to young people countywide, not just in our most underserved communities. So we'll be relying on the JJC and Superintendent Carner for that. I also envision another section, or maybe two or more. We might have to change the shape structure, but eventually we'll be focusing heavily on suicide by firearm and how to prevent it. And everything that you're seeing here will be, there's a heavy emphasis on education and public awareness. So that's sort of longer term. In the short term, like I said, because of our funding requirements, we have to start with the violence interruption, but that's not the only reason we're starting with violence interruption in our underserved communities. The other reason is because of what I'm going to show you here in a moment. I'm jumping ahead. The most important thing to know about the gun violence epidemic is, and I'll circle back to your question here in a minute. The most important thing to know about the gun violence epidemic in America is this: gun violence is not somebody else's problem, it's everybody's problem, and we must all work together to end it. And when I say it's everybody's problem, I mean that very literally, because when gun violence is high in Black and brown communities, in our underserved communities, in Lake County, that's going to be Waukegan, North Chicago, Zion, Round Lake Beach, a little bit of Mundelein, and the Round Lake Beach, a little bit of Beach Park, Winthrop Harbor. The point is, it's not just that Tri-City area, Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion. But that's where we're starting, because you got to start somewhere, and that's where the highest rate of gun violence is right now. When gun violence is high in those Black and brown communities, and this is true nationwide, the firearms industry uses racist marketing strategies to promote its products and sell more guns. And they use fear and racism in order to make people in our communities of privilege afraid, and they're more likely to buy guns. So when that happens over a period of 40 years, which is what we've seen in the United States since the late 70s, early 80s, is you end up with a society that is awash in guns, which is exactly what we have today, which is why if you live where I do, Vernon Hills, and your child or grandchild is going next door to play with the neighbors, you have to assume, if you're not assuming that the neighbors have an unsecured gun or could have an unsecured gun in their home, then you're not seeing the big picture, right? That's how we got here. That combined with the fact that we've had 40 years of systematically dismantling not just policies, but also cultural norms that would have prevented people like Robert Crimo from getting a gun. You put all that together, and what you have is the United States today, where over 48,000 people a year die at the end of a gun. So when gun violence is high in Black and brown communities, only one group of people wins, and it's not gun owners. It's the gun industry and the gun lobby. When violence is high in those communities, they sell more guns in communities like where I live. I live in a community of privilege. And now there are many, many more guns on inventory, accessible to kids, available to be stolen. And I'll just give you an example. Well, let me start with a general statement, and then I'll follow it up with an example. Highland Park, this is what I've learned after doing this work for 7 years. Highland Park happened because as a country, we have failed to prioritize ending the kind of violence that happens every day in Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion. And you may be wondering, what's the connection? Chaya was right. Crimo was not from an underserved community. If you see the bigger picture, which I've tried to outline in this slide here, it happened because we've allowed this system of fear and this system of prioritizing profits for the gun industry and allowing them to do whatever they want in order to sell as many guns as possible, while at the same time ignoring the root causes, such as the inequities in the criminal justice system that lead to gun violence in underserved communities. At the same time, allowing cultural norms and policies that would prevent someone like Crimo from getting a gun to be dismantled in our society. You put all that together, and suddenly it's possible for somebody like Cremo to get a gun, an assault weapon. Not suddenly, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It took 40 years for us to get here. It didn't happen suddenly, right? And if you may be still not quite sure I made a convincing argument, I have not seen the affidavit that Robert Cremo's father signed giving his permission for him to buy an assault weapon or a firearm. I haven't seen the actual affidavit, but I've seen the blank affidavit. And that blank affidavit says absolutely nothing more than my minor child, my son or daughter who is a minor, has my permission to buy a firearm. It does not make it. It is when Cremo's father signed that document, he was taking absolutely zero responsibility for, morally, no, but legally, there's zero responsibility for him in signing that affidavit, because there's not one line in there that says my minor child is of sound mind and is qualified to own a firearm. And our elected officials, in concert with the gun industry, they did it that way on purpose, because the gun industry wants gun violence to be high. I'm going to give you statistics. The top 2 24-hour periods for gun sales in America, the number 1 spot was the Saturday after we shut down for COVID. On that day, gun dealers sold more guns in America than on any other day in our history. In second place was the day after Sandy Hook. So that's what people really have to understand. If you are in the fight to end gun violence, your opponent is not gun owners. Your opponent is the gun industry and the gun lobby, because they are happy. They want gun violence to be high everywhere, especially in Black and brown communities, but everywhere. Because when gun violence is high, people feel afraid and they buy more guns. And here we are. Chaya, how did I do? Did I answer your 2 parts? You had a 2-part question. I hope I answered both of them.
I don't think that was my question. It was Sharon, I think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, Sharon.
Yeah, one quick thing, and I really didn't have time to absorb the organizational outline. I didn't see anything about mental health in there. And I don't mean to sidestep the issue of gun violence with, people have mental health issues. They don't go out and kill people. But a mental health issue that isn't addressed can really take a turn in many ways. Suicide, for one, for sure. I know it creates a never-ending stream of things that you'd like to do, but that was just another thought I had.
Yeah, and thank you for saying what you did about how just because someone isn't mentally ill does not mean that they're going to commit gun violence or any other type of violence. In fact, it is a fact that people who suffer from mental illness are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. Right. But you're right. One of the root causes of our epidemic, but it's not the cause, right? The cause is the gun industry and the gun lobby and the fact that we have allowed them to run amok for 40 years. But a root cause is all of the people who do not get the mental health counseling and support that they deserve. So if you look back here in the green hexagon here for the GB model, you'll see we'll be relying on community-based organizations from all over Lake County to provide mental health counseling, community cognitive behavioral therapy, which we're providing not only for the at-risk and in-risk folks who the interrupters work directly with, but also for the interrupters themselves when necessary. It's called trauma-informed care. And that's something we provide. That's part of the model for the violence interruption is trauma-informed care, not just for the people that we're trying to keep out of the cycle of violence, but also for the people who are doing the anti-violence work. And so that's where the partnerships come in. What's happening in Lake County, like so much of the country, is that we have amazing community-based organizations everywhere. We are so fortunate in Lake County, but they're all operating in silos. They're not talking to each other. They're not collaborating. They're not coordinating, not because they don't want to, but because no one has ever come along and intentionally created the structure so that they can fairly easily and seamlessly collaborate with one another. So mental health, addressing mental health is huge. Because Sharon brought it up, I will also let everyone know one of my last official acts as a Vernon Township trustee was to vote yes to put a referendum on the ballot this past November 8th to get a 708 board in Vernon Township. So a 708 board, we have them in most of the state of Illinois at this point, although there, until now, there have not been any in Lake County. That referendum passed for Vernon Township. So what will happen is property owners in Vernon Township will pay on average an extra $25 in their property tax bill, and that will lead to tens of millions of dollars of supplemental funds for mental health care for organizations like Omni Youth Services. I'm trying to think off the top of my head some of the other organizations in the township. I kind of hopped up on cold medicine, so I can't think of them right now. But that 708 board is off and running, and they're putting together the members of that board right now. And they're going to be deciding what to do with all of this extra funding in order to decrease wait times for people to get therapy and mental health care and things like emergency housing, for example, for folks who, or like young people who get kicked out of their homes, that kind of thing. So what I would really like to see eventually is a 708 board countywide, right? But that's a little bit of a longer term goal. So if there are no more comments on that, I'll go back. How has July 4 impacted our work? So with the Gun Violence Prevention Initiative, like I said, we launched on June 3rd. By the requirements of the funding, which, like I said, the first $500,000 came from the American Rescue Plan Act. That money has to be used for community violence interruption. So that's what I showed you here in this slide, community violence interruption. The folks that are going to be doing interruption work in Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion. What we did immediately after June 3rd was open up and accepted requests for, we had a request for proposals to be the administrative body that will administer the violence interruption program in the Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion area. Government moves pretty slowly. So it was about 6 weeks after that we finally got the chance to start evaluating those proposals. Of course, in the interim, July 4th happened. And what happened between July 4th and roughly the middle of July is we saw a huge spike in gun violence in the Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion area. And so the Lake County State's Attorney, I believe it was late July, early August, held a listening session, and rightly, he was criticized for the fact that from the point of view of the people who are experiencing everyday gun violence just a few miles away in North Chicago, Waukegan, and Zion, from their point of view, it seemed very unfair that Highland Park, within hours of the shooting, the entire Highland Park High School had been devoted to providing services for people who had been impacted by the shooting. And there were hundreds upon hundreds of people available. From the point of view from people who are impacted every day by this type of violence, that seemed deeply, deeply unfair. So we did our best and are still doing our best to convey to those communities that help is coming, right? But honestly, one of the things I struggle with most as the chair of the GVPI is helping people understand that government takes time. It moves slowly. We launched on June 3rd. We weren't able to announce which organization would administer the violence interruption program until 2 weeks ago. So even though we chose the administrator of our violence interruption program in August, it took another 4 months to work out all of the problems with the insurance and things like that so that we could officially launch and start accepting applications for violence interrupters. How has July 4 impacted our work? It has drawn into sharp relief what I already knew to be true. Our biggest problem, in my opinion, is people in one type of community, a community of privilege, and people in their often neighboring community, a community that is underserved. They're seeing the same types of pain and suffering, but they're perceiving it very differently. One community feels angry and hurt that this was allowed to happen, but the other community feels exactly the same way, but they also feel that nobody cares about them, right? And so the biggest challenge in this is getting people to understand it's actually all one problem, right? It's not two separate problems. Mass shootings is not somehow separate from what happens every day on the south and west side of Chicago. And I hope this graphic has illustrated that point for you. If there's anything confusing about it, I'd actually really love it if you'd tell me, because I know what I'm saying is true. This graphic, my ability to make that connection for people, I'm sure it can be improved. So if any of you are like listening to me make this point and you're just kind of, I don't completely get it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You'd be doing me a favor to help me revise my argument. Chaya?
I just want to say, I think this graphic is, I just took a picture of it because I want to have it and I want to send it because I do work with 1A in Illinois. In fact, we just had our bi-monthly meeting today, which I missed. And the league, the gun violence prevention Google group. And I want people to see this and put everything together. It is such a complex problem, but also it is actually simple when you look at this. And I know that there was a recent shooting of people who were out on the west side, I believe. My husband actually works in the Austin community, and I'm familiar with the Austin community. And some of the people
14 people, most from the same family.
The people said they were so hurt. We want what Highland Park got.
That's
and
right.
Yet, and at the same instance, I know that people went to Washington and met with people from Uvalde, which was not a privileged community and was yet another story. But that this does affect everybody, and it is the firearms industry, because people who are getting the guns, say on the south and west side, and this is prevalent, they're coming in from, they're buying through third party, they're coming in from Indiana. And right now, what is so important, I have the article right here, that we get this assault weapons ban, at least all of these gun laws passed in Illinois, and start there at home, and then try to do something about keeping these guns out of the hands of people in other communities that come from other states. But I said too much, but anyway.
No, you did not say too much. In fact, you said two
great
key
graphic.
things. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a great graphic. And I also just want to point out to you, and the other problem is a terrific book to read. I really recommend this for everybody. It was written with an educator by a father of a victim of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas school, Andrew,
Fred Gutenberg.
Why Meadow died.
Oh, not Fred Gutenberg. Okay, interesting.
No, Why
Okay,
Meadow
right.
died. This is such an important book, and it's about
Okay.
the failures that go on in schools with these students, almost to a person. The mass shooters have been young men who had terrible problems in school, and even this Club Q situation have been people who were going to explode one day and were not getting help that they needed, whether it be mental health or it be educational help. So there's just so much to the picture. There's an excellent speaker. I don't know if you've heard of him. His name is Bruce Liebe, Liebe. And I will put people in touch with him because he is a former Illinois state police officer. He was asked to come into the investigation at Northern Illinois University when they had the school shooting there in February, I believe it was on Valentine's Day in February 2014, I think. And it's not talked about a lot, but that was another person who had mental health problems. But anyway, he has a whole perspective on this about mass shooters, about identifying people, and at the school level. So anyway, I'm not going to talk anymore, but this is excellent.
Well, thank you. If you could put those information about both of those things in the chat, the book, and also what was the other thing you said? Cold medicine is making my brain foggy.
Oh,
But
Bruce
anything you
Lee.
could share, I'd appreciate. Yeah, you actually in your comments gave me segues to two really important points that I want to make. One is that, okay, and I want to choose my words carefully here, but I want to give you my perspective on some of the advocacy that has come out of July 4th. First of all, I'm in favor of all advocacy, 100%, full stop. Anybody doing anything to end gun violence, I'm cheering them on all the way, okay? However, I know one thing to be true. If tomorrow the US Congress passes a federal assault weapons ban, 1/2 of the grassroots gun violence prevention movement in this country will disappear overnight. Because most of the people in this movement, and I'm talking about the millions across the whole country, I'm not talking about individuals that we all know, probably none of you, but most of the people in this movement, in their minds, they think the problem is what happened on July 4th. They're not seeing the connection that I'm trying to make in this slide. The problem is what happens every day in Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion. July 4th is the result of it. And if we end shootings like what happened in July 4th, an assault weapons ban will not end them. I can come and talk about that on a different day if you want, but it will help, but it won't end them. But a lot of people think it will. And if we pass an assault weapons ban at the federal level, overnight, 1/2 of this movement will disappear because they don't understand by ending violence like what happened on July 4th is putting a Band-Aid on the actual problem. It's not addressing the root causes. Now, March 4th is an amazing organization. What they have been able to achieve in a few months is mind-blowing. We would not have seen the assault weapons ban pass out of the US House of Representatives without Uvalde, July 4th, and March 4th. Okay, and lots of other activists as well. But the fact that they were able to mobilize so fast is amazing. Okay. However, I have seen, and I've been watching since July 4th, what comes out of that group. And it is very clear that they see no connection between their main concern, which is gun violence, the type that happened in July 4th or in school shootings, and the need to pass the Safety Act and to end cash bail in Illinois. They say no connection between them. And that scares me because ending cash bail is one of the primary root causes of why we have such weak communities in places like the South and West Side of Chicago. On average, adult males, 60% of the adult males in underserved communities in Illinois are incarcerated. it goes on and on and on. One of the initiatives, what's the right word? One of the changes in the Safety Act is that it ended prison gerrymandering. Most people have no idea what this is. I had no idea what it was until the Safety Act came along. Prison gerrymandering is when, if a prison like the one in Joliet, people who are incarcerated in the prison in Joliet are counted as members of the community of Joliet, not of the community where their families live. That's been happening for decades, maybe more, 100 years or more. Over time, that's one of the reasons that those communities, like on the south and west side of Chicago, like Waukegan, North Chicago, and Zion, it's one of the reasons those communities have been disinvested. There's economic disinvestment there. It all works together. I can see from the words and the messages that are coming out of March 4th, they don't get this. They don't get this connection that I'm trying to show you with the slide. And that's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night, because all we're going to do is make privileged people safer, right? Which is great. I'm all for that. But the gun violence is not going to go away. Your neighbors are still going to own guns because they're scared of Waukegan and North Chicago and Zion. And you're still going to have to worry. You can end an assault weapons ban. That doesn't mean you're not going to have to worry about your child or grandchild encountering an unsecured firearm. We need so much more than that, right? So I hope, I don't know, I hope that went down okay. It's just, I can't pass up an opportunity to try to make that point. And what concerns me most is people within the movement, organizations within the movement, whether it's my own organization or Illinois Alliance to Prevent Gun Violence or One Aim. If we're not uniting around that message, then in the long run, we're just putting a Band-Aid on the problem. However, I don't want to end on a sad note. I'm actually quite hopeful, especially for Illinois, and I'd like to tell you why. Hooray, big news. Today, your state legislature, your House Representative, Bob Morgan, dropped the Protect Illinois Communities Act. It will ban assault weapons in Illinois, including large capacity magazines and rapid fire devices. It will increase accountability for gun manufacturers and retailers. It will create the Illinois State Police Anti-Gun Trafficking Strike Force, Gun Trafficking Strike Force. It will increase the eligibility to get a firearm owner identification card from age 18 to 21, and it will help remove firearms from dangerous people, for example, who are under orders of protection. That was announced today, this afternoon. I was informed of it about an hour before this meeting started. So what you can do to help make sure that the Protect Illinois Communities Act passes is you can contact Representative Morgan to thank him, and then have all of your friends and family in other parts of the state call their representatives too. They can find their state legislator here. So if I know League of Women Voters cannot do that in the name of your organization, but as individuals, I hope you will consider it.
Yes, we can. We can. Oh, we can.
Oh, you can. Okay,
We
great.
can. You know, we can write a letter supporting of this.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yes, we can write a letter in support of this.
Oh, good. I'm so
Okay.
happy.
We will.
Could you put that back on the screen
guess-
again for a minute?
Here, I thought I was on mute.
And do me a favor, if you call
Thank you.
Rep Morgan,
Uh-huh.
let him know I told you. Okay.
Okay, I will. I was mostly going to write him though.
You can say that too, or you can say,
Sarah did it. She was wonderful. Yes.
you can, well, I used to work for him, so that's why I'm
And actually, I
very,
knew that. So
what's that?
I read your resume, so I knew that.
Yeah, I mean, he is just one of the finest people ever to serve in government. You're so fortunate to have him as your legislator.
He is too, and I'm sorry, this is Kaya again. We just got redistricted, and we had been for the longest time, I live in Northfield, and we had been in Robin Gable's district, in Laura Fine's state senate district, and Jan Schakowsky's 9th, and we just got totally redistricted
Oh,
into Brad Schneider's district,
oh, you're in my district
and
then.
John Carroll's 57th district, and Julie Morrison's district. So
Also-
very fortunate, and we're so happy that they won. And one of the wonderful things about John Carroll, and I was trying to work on his campaign, we're very worried about it because we knew who he was running against. And the person he was running against was somebody who, and I'm not speaking as a league person now, but the person I'm speaking as my own person. I'm speaking for One Nine Illinois. I'm speaking for LDA, Learning Disabilities Association of Illinois, et cetera, or an individual. But his opponent opposed, out and out said he opposed the assault weapons ban. And it says Carroll also helped lead legislation to impose a universal 72-hour background check for all gun purchases and backs a ban on assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines. How can anyone justify allowing military-style weapons on the streets? Carroll is endorsed. And this was the Tribune. And that helped him
Wonderful. That's
so
great.
much to be endorsed by the Tribune.
Yes. that's
Because I
wonderful.
know he got a lot of votes because of that. And the Sun Times was not endorsing anyone anymore because they're a 501c3.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right. So this was and this was like a 2-paragraph and a wonderful endorsement. And a lot of it was because of his stance on the assault weapons ban.
Yeah, the other thing that I will tell you, 7 years ago when I first got involved in this movement, everyone who had been in this movement for a long time, by the time I came along, they said you cannot ever say the word ban. It's something you just don't even say it because nobody will listen to you. Nobody will take you seriously if you start saying you want a ban of any kind. So one thing that I can tell you, if you're feeling a lot of despair because of where we're at in this country, I don't blame you, especially for the trauma that you've just been through this summer. But I only know this because I have 7 years of perspective now. So much has changed. So much has changed since 2015 when I started. Let me give you an example. I could go on with examples all day. 6 months after Sandy Hook, the bipartisan background check bill went before Congress and it failed to pass. And many Democrats voted against the bill as well for only one reason, because they were afraid that they would lose their seats. And one of the people who headed up that effort to defeat that bipartisan background check bill was Senator John Cornyn. And he was, like so many people in Congress have done for decades, just doing the gun lobby's bidding. Fast forward to July, or maybe it was it was July of this year. Uvalde had just happened. Highland Park had just happened. And for 10 years since Sandy Hook, the grassroots gun violence prevention movement has relentlessly advocated for gun safety, including the assault weapons ban. And honestly, until July 4th, nobody. And on July 4th, I had just come off of 2 years of working at the federal level in order to get federal gun safety legislation passed. If anyone had asked me on July 3rd, if there's any chance we would get an assault weapons ban passed out of the House this year, I would have said, absolutely not. I'd bet my house it will not happen. Uvalde and July 4th changed everything. And around the same time, but it wasn't just the two events. It was Uvalde, July 4th, and the 10 years of our activism that took place since Sandy Hook. And John Cornyn led the team of Republicans that joined forces with the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus in the Senate in order to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And when a reporter asked him after that bill passed the Senate, reporter asked John Cornyn the following question. Reporter said, "Senator, why did you support this bill when you know that the gun lobby is against it?" Now remember, he did their bidding 6 months after Sandy Hook, 10 years ago. His answer to the reporter after the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed was, "Well, I think the NRA and the gun lobby are opposed to the bill because it doesn't fit their business model." Now, if I hadn't been an advocate in this work for 7 years, I would have completely missed the significance of that. And anybody who hasn't been doing this full time for 7 years can be forgiven for completely missing the significance of that. But it meant the world to me, because what Cornyn was doing was he was signaling to the gun lobby exactly what I've put in this slide. I, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, I'm not going to do your bidding anymore. So when you're feeling despair, and it's certainly understandable that you would, especially with what you and your community have just been through, everything has changed since Sandy Hook. And when you hear somebody say, and they will, nothing has changed since Sandy Hook, they are wrong. Everything has changed since Sandy Hook.
Well, wow. Can everyone hear me? Hello. Hello? Am I speaking? Okay, I am speaking. I cannot tell you how wonderful this has been. I mean, the information, this is really a wonderful program. We never have programs that run this long.
Well, that's because I talk a lot,
No,
Barbara.
no,
I hope I'll get invited back.
You will be invited back. There was not a wasted word among what you've said. So really, it was wonderful. We really appreciate you giving us all this time, considering the fact you can't talk. So, but you talk better now than you did earlier today. So
Yeah, I think I'm getting better, but I'm also just, I'm really energized because, we can't stop. I mean, I have helped survivor advocates talk to legislators and ask for change for 7 years. And if they can do it, then we can if they can keep going, so can we. If they can tell their stories of the worst moment of their lives over and over, then so can we, right?
Well, so we'll have number 2 later. Soon.
Great.
Later.
And I'd love, if you have an in-person meeting, I would love to come and
Oh, we will. We're all looking forward to these in-person meetings.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yeah.
So really, thank you so much for the time you've given. And
Truly my
this
pleasure.
person here can say this is a really well-attended meeting for us. So thank you so very much.
Well, trust me, it was my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Nancy.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So much. Could I just say, I put in the chat, please, everybody here, please go to nonotoriety.com.
Yes.
Get the press, the mainstream media, everyone to stop saying a shooter's name.
Yep. Brilliant.
There is proof, there's evidence that there's copycat shootings. I really think, the minute I heard about the Highland Park shooting, it was a young man from the area, and it turned out to be somebody who was photogenic for people who are on social media and the dark web, and a perfect copycat kind of situation. So go to nonotoriety.com. It was started by survivors, parents of victims of the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting.
And one of the people who started it joins my biweekly update every 2 weeks.
Oh, wonderful.
Kathy Larimer. And again, so I put the No Notoriety website here in the chat. If anybody wants to look at it. But, that's a good example. Please join my Honor with Action biweekly update whenever you can, because there's so much. I mean, I know I have talked so much tonight, but we have just touched the very, very tiniest tip of the iceberg on this issue. And I would love to just have you join us to, stay informed and help spread the word.
All right. Thank you. We'll invite you back. Thank you.
Great.
So
Please
much.
do.
I feel better.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks,
You guys
everybody.
have made me feel better. I feel more energized than I have all week. And that's because of you.
Good.
Thank you.
That was my goal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye. Hi, Allison.
Hi, Allison.
I'm
Good
hanging
to
up.
see you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Okay. I'm going to try to hang up, but I guess I can't.
It was excellent. Oh, I'm
It
the one
was
that's
good.
going to end it. So you can.
Okay, you're the one who's going to end us. Like wipe
end it.
us off, please.
I will say that we had, a number of people, we kept the majority of the people for the entire time.
Well,
which
why not?
does not
Great.
usually happen. She was terrific.
Yes.
And we should thank Margaret Lindsay, who connected us.
Yes, we should. Was Margaret on?
No, she was not able to, but
Oh, dear. Okay, well, thank you.
thank
All right.
you.
Everyone have a good evening.
And I hope everybody feels better.
Yes, happy holidays. I'm
Yeah,
going to hang up now. I'm leaving. Goodbye.
bye. It's done.